Okay. So at our meeting last week, we were talking about this use of space in the building as a whole. And we were talking about the House chamber and the Senate chamber. Would those spaces be able to be used, you know, for caucuses or for overflow space? If there's committees that on a particular day or particular topic, they're having more folks coming into the room, then what's the capacity of that room? Because we've lost room 10 and we've lost room 11 because they're going to be temporary committee rooms for the interim. So we need some space for that. So we wanted to reach out to both you and the House clerk to see what the possibilities were with this, how that, are there issues within the rules of either chamber or anything that you folks could weigh in and help us decide if that's an option or not? Does that make sense? A little bit?
Everything you always say makes sense.
Yeah,
It's a question whether or not I'm interpreting it appropriately to give you an answer. So it's conceivable, but not as easy as you want. So, I mean, the easiest way to think of the two chambers or the whole legislative, some of my senators have heard some of this before, but the easiest way to really think of the legislature is there are really two different countries that are sharing the same building. And it's the House has complete control over their chamber, and generally after the rooms have been assigned, you really decide what to do with your rooms, chairs, and the House Rules Committee. Same on the Senate side. And so we're only invited over into your chamber with a joint resolution. We cannot go in and use your chamber. The House should not be really in our chamber. There are some other decorum issues, like whether the speaker should be in the chamber. You know, as a representative, you can go in, but there are, like the governor comes in, we're in recess immediately. And so it's the easiest way to think about it is there's 3 or 4 different rules committees. One is the Senate rules, one's the House rules, and the joint rules. You can think of the joint rules as like the UN kind of figuring out the and so as I know, kind of talk about where it may seem like it's overly diffused, but there are historical and I think constitutional reasons for having the separation. The other issues you can do with at least the Senate chamber, you have to remember that those are really the senators' desks. And so one of the things that we have is when we are going to use it for other purposes, or when they allow other purposes, you had some maybe even institutions have come in jointly. We usually announce it. Everybody gets to pick up their desks because things can be left on a desk. And whether or not we want, I say this without due respect, whether we want representatives sitting at another senator's desk, I'm not sure as chair of institution, corrections in the House, I'd want you sitting in Senator Benning's desk. That's sort of my job, to make sure that you could have something confidential for the conference committee sitting on his desk. So there's a bit of it may seem like protectiveness or whatever, but the whole idea is you're going into someone else's country. You can use the chamber, or it has been used. We do caucuses, or the Senate does caucuses in the chamber. Senators sit in their own seat. We've allowed joint meetings. They're usually requested by the chair on our side. Judiciary's done it. I think institutions done it. Health and welfare's done it. Government operations has done it. That's usually requested by the chair of the committee in the Senate, and we sort of run it by the rules of making sure that they have permission. To use the chamber on an ongoing basis creates some logistical issues. You can imagine that the House, especially during the crossover and the end of the session, really needs to have their chamber available pretty much at 7 or 8 at night. It's very difficult to start scheduling committee.
When you said joint, you're talking about joint committee meetings, right? And that's between the House and the Senate?
Yeah. And so we do not allow, it's been requested, we do not allow outside performances. I mean, the House has some things that come in, especially Wednesday or Thursday.
Wednesday
night.
Farmers night.
Farmers.
You know when farmer's night.
I know, because you, Senator, we always have an announcement on the Senate floor. Say,
She used to do it on her house.
Whether we want it or not.
I always find it informational.
Allison?
So, John, these are extraordinary times. And I think we are all trying to think outside the box a little bit about space use. So I would hope that both the House and the Senate Chamber, Senate Chamber has provided sometimes with Farmers Night when we've had hearings that have unexpectedly continued in the House Chamber. So, the Senate Chamber has been used for that in that capacity, but I would hope that we either joint rules or that we could think creatively about how to use both the Senate and House chambers, because with no room 11 and no room 10 to use for caucuses or for special types of meetings, I would hope that we would be able to, when it was appropriate and when it was available, use it in a more fulsome fashion for this extraordinary period.
The closest we've come is last year. One of the alternatives was having the Senate go to the House chamber.
Right.
We actually went to the House Rules Committee and requested it, and I can only tell you that none of the players are currently here. But the House found it entertaining to have the Senate come over and requested the ability to use their chamber. You all were going to be off campus at the Berry Auditorium. It would have to go through, the joint rules does not control what happens in the Senate chamber, just like in the House chamber. You'd have to go to the Senate rules and request it. They do have some control over that. There are a lot of ancillary issues that could be worked out if it had to. And the example would be food and beverage in the chamber. We are a little more strict. I think we've had, I don't know why the House hasn't, we've had some real bad, nasty issues, like hot chocolates in the desks tipped over. I mean, it's just, so I mean, we're a little more strict. Some of our senators don't mind. Most of them don't mind. Some of them, please.
Some of us chafe at it a little.
That we're quite that strict, but there would probably be similar things. I do know that there are already conflicts that occur in room 10 and 11 that probably the Sergeant at Arms would be easier of explaining conflicts between caucuses and committee meetings and what kind of havoc that creates at the moment it occurs. And if suddenly there was a committee that was caucusing and the Senate had scheduled or the House had scheduled, the logistics might, it's not the greatest diplomacy or working through. I mean, once again, the Sergeant at Arms can explain some of it's not always a pleasant moment when there's jointly booked in a room. It's created some underlying undertones in the past. I mean, everybody gets over them, but at the moment, everybody's meeting is the most important in the world. And there have been some issues. It's not constitutionally impermissible. There are some statutory that talk about cameras and various other uses. It would maybe make a bit of a difference on what you're doing, recommending with videos and cameras and such. Each chamber controls their own what's going to be in there. Same idea. Each rules committee decides what will be occurring in their committee rooms. If the House and the Senate do two different things, that could create a potential issue. I know from our perspective in the Senate chamber, there are really three alternatives that could occur. One is that everybody's back in the building and we don't even broadcast, kind of back the way it was. Two is we do some sort of broadcasting. Three, which is the nightmare scenario for the staff, is that there's a hybrid that has about 20 or 25 senators present, 5 trying to remote, because physically to the chamber, I don't know if anybody has not been up. You should come up to the Senate chamber. It's not as bad as it was because we've removed most of the TVs. You have some of them now.
Like WCAX. Felt like WCAX up here.
The visuals are impossible for us to see. The Lieutenant Governor to really see if you're doing a hybrid. And so depending on what the House or the Senate decides to do themselves may affect what's available for other committees and joint committees.
Right.
I'm not sure exactly what the Senate Rules Committee is going to decide. I can tell you sort of the different alternatives. Maybe Kevin's giving some, but we've been trying to plan the various avenues, but that may limit what even the House committees want to do if they're in there. Because they may not have the same access.
Right.
So am I interpreting this correctly that for access, electronic access, video access, that the House could adopt something very different than the Senate and vice versa?
Yeah.
So we could come into this next legislative session where the House could be visually streaming their proceedings, but the Senate not.
That's correct. Right now, the higher probability is reversed. Because without getting, we have a resolution which allows, if the Rules Committee decides to continue remote, allows our committees to go remote in our sessions till January 7th, which is Friday of the return. And that was because we weren't sure what was going to happen on that Wednesday when y'all come back, or Tuesday. And so the idea was to give some flexibility. It may very well be our Rules Committee says everybody needs to be present, no one can be remote. But the way our current resolutions are adopted for our temporary rules, the Senate could be, without doing anything further, the Senate could be remote first.
And that's separate from the joint resolution that we passed.
The joint resolution, because the joint rules and anything dealing with joint committees has to be adopted by both chambers. And I believe, Ras would be better at answering that, but I believe that all your committees are going to have to be in person both during the summer and when you, at this point, return in January. And I know our Rules Committee will be working out it. My expectation is I think they plan it back, but there is a flexibility that if they decided they couldn't be, Senate wouldn't have to adopt a new resolution.
Questions?
We also have October. If we have a notion of where we are, if things have changed at all, we have that October time too, that we have a joint resolution that we've adjourned to. So we could anticipate, we could do something.
Yeah, that's correct. The Senate has the same as they've been doing for the last year and a half, all the way through January 7th. I mean, there's some tinkering because the Rules Committee made it slightly different ground rules this year. And another example is that last year, because no one knew how it was going to work, we actually called the roll beginning of every session, see who was present, make sure we had a quorum. It began to work fairly well. So our current permanent rule, which we adopted a permanent rule, does not require that because it worked fairly well. Everybody trusted who they were seeing was really on the screen. It was a new time and there were safeguards built in to make sure everyone felt comfortable with what was happening. But we learned over the 6 months or a year.
So what I'm hearing is if there is a situation where there's a joint House and Senate committee meeting, there is the possibility that the Senate chambers could be used for that particular meeting.
Yes.
There is nothing that says you can't constitutionally. Once again, you'd have to get my belief is you'd have to get the Senate Rules Committee to approve. Now, with that said, it's not an individual, it's not my office approving it because it basically is not supposed to be used right now by custom tradition, by Senate committees or by joint committees. I guess where I'm going is depends on your definition of joint. If Senator Benning called up my office next week and said that yours and his committee were going to meet, that kind of a joint committee, we'd probably try to figure out a way of arranging it.
That was my question.
Yeah.
That was the intent of my
I
question.
didn't know if you meant, this is a joint.
No, I meant during
Depending
the
on how you-
session, a House and Senate, the counterparts, they're taking up an issue that both committees need to hear, and it would be better to hear at the same time. And we do that, and we have room 10 and room 11, and we do that. So at least in those situations, for this interim, the Senate chambers might be available.
It has been, and it would continue to be as far as, unless I'm instructed otherwise by my Rules Committee, right now it is and would be continued to be available. We could set up a more formal process that people would know, but I can tell you that the way we've done it in the past is the chair asks, we tell them that, usually run by the pro tem's office and tell them it's not being used, it looks like we're not coming in session. If we go over, Senator White does, has her, I think it's a joint committee that comes.
We always do it at town meeting.
Town meeting?
When the VLCT day.
PLCT. And so they come in And she's had to have hers canceled because they were postponed. And so there is some scheduling issues. The Senate takes priority and that's sort of the way it's
Right.
scheduled.
Well, each body takes up.
We, so you'll know, I don't know, we have, you haven't taken the tour once again, we put up plastic around the balcony, then to keep that. We priced that all out. BGS was great on getting us pricing. That was what I considered affordable. I think it was like $4,000. We could do you could do the balcony. I'm not sure what the house would cost, but that was like 15 to 17 grand. We talked about actually doing dividers, that was like 80 grand, 70 grand. It's just, depending on where your cost points are, you can add in additional protections. We do have it currently in the chamber. They may go because of the sound, but right now we have at least one air exchange. We have another one. We used to have two in this chamber. We have, because we're kind of cramped in our office given size. So we have one of the air exchangers in the office, one of the air exchangers on the Senate floor. We did have two during the end of the session, but those usually are turned down. BGS would be better at telling you that the Senate chamber, I think, has some of the better air quality in the building, is what we've been told, and it can usually exchange out pretty quick. So in that sense, it's not a capacity issue. It's really a spacing issue.
Do the Senate chair, the Senate desks there lock?
No,
They don't lock.
They,
you know, well, there are two things. They currently don't lock. They're used for desks. I won't push back. I don't want them locked, but I know that Mr. Sheets would just about kill us all if we suddenly started putting locks on them. Why would you suspect? There are,
why we put them on in the house?
yeah.
These are the original desks. The house desks date to 1971.
Got it.
Those are, because they were smaller. The old ones were small. You look at the old pictures, they were
Yeah, they were
240
tiny.
some odd desks. They were much smaller. There's a couple originals somewhere. There are, if you decide you want to do things to the Senate desks, you should tell. Because there's a couple little things that if you're going to destroy them,
I
Oh,
want to destroy them.
destroy them in some sense. Well, I just mean, there are a couple ideas that the individuals who are representatives or former representatives may find me to be sort of a dinosaur on this, but eventually there is going to be some kind of electronics in the Senate floor. We need things hardwired and that I've never pushed it yet because that may affect the desks.
right. And people may want to lock their computers
And so there's, well, I don't,
or whatever.
so without, as far as.
It's not locking the computers, it's the wiring. of
But it's,
Oh, yeah, the wire.
it's much more, without, this is not your topic, but without going to, generally speaking, the best way to keep it with the Senate tradition would be to actually have touch screens on the top of the desk.
Have what?
Touch screens on the top of the desks that are wired in, that are removable and that are basically confined to the web page during a session, because then you run your committee, and then, because then I don't have to worry about email, and I don't have to worry about cards, and I don't have to worry about a lot of other stuff. And then they could still be used during the session. They could be turned on. They could, but that's taking wiring. That is something quite a bit different. But there's no locks and there's no wiring.
So let's get back to, another thing that goes through my mind, and I don't know which being of the other caucus. I know there's been conversations that at least on the House side, the Democratic caucus in the House. I don't know where the Republicans will go.
Oh, we thought we'd run over to the Senate.
So as
So that's a question.
representative from, I don't know if you hold this, Pittsburgh Brandon. So as he knows, that was tried a couple of years ago. It was not well received. Well, it's because there was no permit. It was just everybody showed up. And so that so the problem becomes it needs permission. And two, the real problem is it's the desks that are their desks. I mean, I can I don't want to give you senators' names, but you know, there's senators from Bennington, from Windsor, that don't want a whole bunch of people from the corresponding committee sitting in their desks during a caucus. Unless they know they can clear them off. They can put, and so it's currently a workspace, and senators, some senators leave their stuff on their desks.
And we do in the House.
We do, yeah, the House.
So I'm just wondering, because caucuses, the weekly caucus is pretty well scheduled there, so for the other party, the Republican caucus, they would fit in the Senate for their normal weekly caucus. So could the Senate chamber be used for their weekly caucus, providing you're not in session?
Well, and providing the Senate Democratic caucus might not want to use it.
Well, that's the coordination. I'm just wondering, is it possible to do that? Because I don't know where the Republicans.
I'm more worried about the pop-up recess
Yeah, the possible-
than it would be a scheduled, I mean, we could schedule a weekly over.
Right.
So
Yeah,
you,
we can work that out.
Yeah.
depending on the size of the, it's like 46, 48, that's pretty big. And it can be done, but that's just, because you have 30 seats, you have people standing, there's,
Window seats,
it's just, it gets,
couches.
it can be done. We can get more than 48, but that's a
Could do
pretty
it.
size crowd.
So you'd have to do some internal logistics in terms of your Senate rules in order for that to occur, correct?
Right.
Senate rules would need to.
Yeah.
I mean, it is not like the building representatives cannot go into the Senate chamber or the
Right.
senators cannot go into the House chamber. It would be unusual. It's probably been used a couple times, but it's not unconstitutional. It's not against the rules.
And this is not permanent. This is trying to get us through coming back into the building in January so we can function in person as a legislative body, not knowing what COVID is going to do. If COVID was going away, we'd probably be back in the building like we were. We may want to do that to begin with. at the rate
That is
we're
our,
going.
that's an option.
That's an option. I'm beginning to go into that option.
Numbers here.
Questions?
I don't see this as a big issue. I think caucuses, whether they're pop-up caucuses or otherwise, can meet at 109 or 133.
Sorry, Joe, we couldn't hear that last bit.
I think
We heard the first.
my voice as I get older, that's it. Anyway,
Are they
I think
acoustics
pop-up
here?
caucuses or scheduled caucuses can meet at 133 or 109, and this does not become an issue at all. That's the reality of a temporary fix
Yeah, I agree.
across the parking lot.
I think this is workable.
But if there was something that occurred where we really felt that we needed the Senate chambers, there are ways we can work through that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just like, you could technically do a joint assembly in the Senate chamber if you all wanted to come and stand. I mean, there are ways of working through any of that. Which is the unfortunate thing, it's not always easy to do with media, but it can all be worked.
That's good to know. Other questions?
You have been, I don't know if it's a step up or a step down, but you've been referring to this room as the legislative lounge room. I think for at least some of you, it used to be the Supreme Court. So
Yes.
you may just want to refer to it as the Supreme Court. I don't know if that makes it more dignified or less dignified.
Used
Their
to be
picture is still on the
legislative
wall
council.
outside the door, so you know.
Correct.
Used to be ledge council too, sitting here.
That's right.
It's been a lot of things. It's been used flexibly. The CDC just reinstated the mask guidance in response to threat of Delta.
In places of high transmission.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean, well,
everywhere.
Well,
They did it actually for both those vaccinated and unvaccinated, but only in high areas. I believe.
Yeah.
is it both
They made a
vaccinated?
recommendation.
I've been wearing my mask. Anything else, Senate Secretary?
This has been late. I expected a lot bigger grilling. You've been waiting a while.
Well, we're just hoping that we will all be generous with our spaces and generous and thoughtful.
hopefully our rules committee will get those stupid TV cameras out of our Senate chambers.
Food. The Rules Committee.
Just my opinion.
Yeah, well, there are lots of ways of accomplishing different goals depending on what you all have. But there's, most of the big TV cameras have to come out of there to make it functional, but that doesn't mean that the Rules Committee could decide they still want to do some sort of broadcasting. And we probably have 2 or 3 alternatives that we sort of put together, but they would be less intrusive, I think. And that's probably what everybody wants is still,
Good point. We need to start discussing that maybe soon.
but I can also tell you, there's a difference in the way bills are discussed when things are broadcasted.
Yes,
I'm not,
I'll
some of it
second
is-
that.
some of it is better and some of it is worse.
yes, I agree with that.
This is true. On the other hand, I don't think, well, anyway. another discussion.
So, thank you. Appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
So I'd like to shift now to the use of 109 and 133. So prior to this item of defining our term of overflow, I would like to go into executive session. And I would entertain a motion.
Move that we,
I have it.
It has to be worded a certain way.
I move that the committee enter into executive session to discuss security or emergency measures related to buildings within the Capitol complex that the General Assembly plans to use during the 2022 legislative session.
So it's been moved that we go into executive session.
happy to,
The second to that, do we? I don't believe. Discussion. So for folks who are not members of this committee,